Okay. So this is week 2. This chapter is on structural oppression and racism. Okay. So this is the definition of oppression. Oppression is deliberate, not an accident. The term inequality almost makes it seem like it's an accident rather than deliberate. I'm not sure if I already mentioned this to you folks, but um, white men with a criminal record are more likely to get called for job interviews than black men without a criminal record, according to research. Also, homes are appraised at a higher value by real estate agents when there are photos of white families in the home than black families in the home. So these are examples of racism and anti blackness in society. White teachers punish black students um, more often than do for the same behaviors than do black teachers. So racial representation in professions is important. Also, doctors tend to perceive black patients' pain tolerance as higher than white patients and are less likely to prescribe them pain medication and are less likely to be sympathetic to their pain. Again, so these are all examples of racism and anti-blackness. I'm not sure if I did those examples last week, but just I'm going to pepper them throughout this lecture. So that was slide 19. Slide, what is the next one? 18. Structural oppression, so it's institutional, not just individual. Okay. You can read the definition on the slide if you like. Intersectionality. This is the idea of being a double minority, such as a black woman, which is mentioned here. Of course, a person could be advantaged or disadvantaged in more than one way. So, for example, the flip side of this privilege would be a white man. Okay. Privilege is the flip side of inequality. It's the advantages versus the disadvantages. It's the things a person does not have to worry about. So, for example, sexual assault of men is uncommon. So, a male privilege of mine would be that I do not have to worry about sexual assault. Makes my life easier, less stressful, one less thing to worry about. That is a privilege that women in our society do not have. That is, in a nutshell, privilege, the idea of privilege. 16, structural inequality. Basically, if it's good, the dominant group has it, and if it's bad, the socially subordinated group does not, or does have it if it's bad. Um, what appears to be a disadvantage for the dominant group is usually an advantage if a person flips it around or researches it. Not always, there are exceptions to the rule. For example, women live longer than men do, even though women are the socially subordinated group and men are the dominant group. Let me give another example, though, that I may again have already mentioned. More women go to college than men, but that's in part because men's jobs without a college degree pay more than women's jobs without a college degree. So, is it really a disadvantage or is it just an advantage in another area? That would be an example. 15. Race is socially constructed, not biologically constructed. It's based on aspects of appearance. There is more difference within or than between groups. 99% of all DNA is the same for all people. A person can be any blood type. I guess an example of the within and between groups thing would be, for example, the difference between the tallest and the shortest woman is greater than the difference between the average height of a man and the average height of a woman. So there's always more differences between or within groups. That's a gender example, not a racial example, but just, yeah. Anyway, to show the social construction of all these groups. 14. Okay, so racism is a combination of prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice is an attitude. Discrimination is a behavior. Again, it can be institutional or individual. Individual racism can be between any group. It could, for example, be between Hispanic Americans and African Americans. However, discrimination in our society, a society dominated by white people, is typically only done by white people against people of color. So, because they are the ones that have the power. So, which is why the idea of reverse discrimination is kind of ridiculous. I mean, maybe at an individual level, but at an institutional level, no. There are all forms of institutional racism. So, for example, and it may not name the group. For example, Walmart eliminated the greeter job a few years ago. The greeter job is typically done by disabled people and elderly people. So that institutional policy could be viewed as ableist or ageist. That would be an example of institutional discrimination. In those cases, the dominant groups would be able people and younger middle-aged people. 13. And you folks can read the slides if you like. I know they're out of order and some of the definitions are a little bit cut off. The quizzes, they only have 5 questions, so they're not on everything. But anyway, we will go over all of this stuff. Okay. This slide raises issues about the people of color term, or the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I do use those terms, but I understand the issue. What I say about one group usually applies to other groups. There are certain kinds of racism that certain ethnic groups face that certain ethnic groups do not, but usually it applies to all of the groups. But yeah, I get that. So you can read what's here. And of course, it does kind of lump all non-white people into one group. Of course, even the term Asian American lumps people into one group because people of descent from China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam are obviously not the same. And even within those groups are not the same. So it's hard to classify and categorize without doing harm. Of course, white people have a race just like men have a gender, but it's invisible because it's dominant and because it's considered the neutral standard, even though it's biased, not neutral at all, that everybody and everything else is judged by. Okay, that's why critical white studies has become a thing. Okay, 12. These slides are usually backwards for some reason with the PDF, the way it loads. But anyway, okay. So this is a continuation of that slide. The terms Black or African American can be used. The term white supremacy, as it's used in CRT or critical race theory, does not refer to just hate groups. It refers to any society in which white people or so-called white people dominate. So, for example, 75% of all the members of Congress are white men. 90% of all corporate CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are white men. 75% of university presidents and tenure track faculty at universities are white men. Those are the people with PhDs who have become full professors. So most people of color and women are like me. I'm a lecturer and I have a master's degree only, not a PhD. So technically, I'm not a professor. Okay. So that is one idea. 11. This slide interrogates the issue of whiteness. So that is a socially constructed group as well. So, for example, the English and the Scottish would not have considered themselves the same race or the same group 500 years ago. Um, or, for example, myself, I am of Portuguese heritage, um, and people from Brazil are from Portugal, obviously, so descent. So why am I not considered American, right? And for that matter, Latin American people can be white or black. So how do we understand all these racial and ethnic groups? It makes no sense. Is the point? Um, 10, slide 10. Um, okay. For your group project presentations, each group is going to be assigned a book that is on a critical race theory topic, and each person within that group will be responsible for presenting on one chapter. Now, the ebooks are in the library. You can read them if you like, but when I release that part of the group project presentation, it's linked to YouTube videos where the authors give a talk on it, and the YouTube videos themselves are chaptered off, so you could just also go there and watch the video. But there are all sorts of genres of critical race theory. There's um, Black crit, Latin crit, Asian crit, Native crit, Desi crit, um, Muslim or Arab crit, and so on and so forth. And each group will have a book on one of those racial and ethnic groups. Anyway, not slide 9. This is about anti blackness, which is the hatred and stigma in our culture and our society that makes black people and things associated with blackness in our yeah inferior, right, as persons and as groups, and it makes everything that's white in our culture and society, individuals and things associated with whiteness, seem superior as persons and groups. Slide 8. Racial profiling. So, to me, this is just an extension of criminalization, right? And again, criminalization, for example, right now with immigration enforcement and what's called crimmigration, the intersection of the criminal justice system and the immigration systems. Um, Hispanic people have been demonized in our society. Some Hispanic people are undocumented. So being undocumented has become illegal or criminalized as a way to sort of criminalize Hispanic people. And yeah, that's so it's a way to basically it's a crime to be Hispanic in our society, not just a crime to be undocumented. That's the idea, um, right? And that's why U.S. citizens and people who appear to be Hispanic have also been arrested or detained. That's the proof. Um, Slide 7. Islamophobia. So basically, this has a globalization aspect to it, right? So that relates to imperialism and colonialism. Basically, Europeans wished to kill people and take their land, and they invented races and racism as a way to legalize that and justify that. And this continues today, both nationally and internationally, whether it's uh, the treatment, the racism directed at uh, Muslim and Arab people in the United States, or the racism directed at Muslim and Arab people in Palestine. It's all connected. Um, yeah, and this is for all groups: Asian, African, people from the Americas, and the Middle East. And we all know the history of slavery and of the annexation of Mexico, the Native American genocide, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. So this also relates to post-colonial studies too. So yeah, okay. Slide 6. Critical border studies people would also make the point that the border only exists because the country exists, and the country only exists because of the Native American genocide. So the border is a continuation of that violence, basically, and that racism. The only reason white people can tell people who can be here and who cannot be here is because they displaced and dislocated the native population, and because they established that country and that border. So it's all connected. I did not explain that well, but if you're interested in that, you can always read more about it outside of class. Anti-Semitism. Yeah. So again, I would like to make the point that racism did not just come from slavery. Slavery came from racism, and even though slavery does not continue today per se, racism does. So yeah, that is a point I should make. I should also make a point about this, the genocide going on in Palestine. Um, there is much I could say about that, but again, going back to the Alamo and remember the Alamo, what that was all about was Americans illegally immigrating to Mexico. Mexico tried to get them to leave. The Alamo happened. Maybe it was tragic or whatever. I don't know. And then the U.S. government used that as an excuse to kill Mexicans and steal their land in the Mexican American War, annex half of Mexico. The situation today with Palestine and Israel is that. I mean, October 7th was a tragedy, but it has nothing to do with everything else that is going on now. The Israeli government does not care about the hostages. They don't care about Israeli lives. They don't care about Palestinian lives. They just want to kill Palestinians and take their land. That's what this is about. Um, okay. Number 5, black codes. I probably mentioned this last week, but after slavery was the convict leasing program where former slaves were arrested for things like vagrancy and loitering and then were leased out to, in some cases, the very plantations where they had been slaves before. Then after that, we got Jim Crow segregation. And then after that, we got the war on drugs and drug felonies. So drug crimes became federal crimes, drug crimes became felonies, and in some cases, felonies are not allowed the right to vote. You can legally discriminate against them in housing, social welfare programs, employment, and so on and so forth. Which this all relates to my idea that slavery and racism are not synonymous, and racism continues today. Slide 4. Yes, okay, so CRT. Um, let's see. So this is the idea that racism may or may not be explicit or obvious, but it continues and is transformed into implicit and subtle forms throughout history. And everything I've been talking about today are examples of that. So maybe you get a sense of the flavor for, this is the best cutting edge stuff, by the way. I mean, I'm I'm a head over heart person. I wouldn't say it if it weren't true. Obviously, I care about social justice, but this is just scientifically the best stuff out there today. So, anyway, slide 3, individual and interpersonal racism. So, racism can be subconscious. Everyone is biased. I'm biased. People of color are biased against themselves. That's called internalized depression. So, for example, you may be aware of the black doll experiments. That's when black girls were asked which doll is prettier, the white doll or the black doll, and the black girls would often say the white doll. So everybody has it. And obviously, if black girls would say that, what do you think white girls would say? Right, exactly. Not to mention everybody else. So yeah, so that relates to that. Slide 2. Let's see. So these are all Latinx terms that are connected to each other. Remember, inequality can be political, economic, educational, related to family, health, or the media. So media representations of people of color are either invisible or stereotypic, negative stereotypes, or pit groups against each other. Lack of political representation is an issue for women. That's obvious. Women are like what 51% of the U.S. population, but only I don't know 30% or less of Congress. Um, you know, again, I'm going to use African Americans as an example, but this applies often to other groups. Um, African Americans on average have lower incomes than white people. African Americans have lower college graduation rates than white people. African Americans have, I'm going to skip the issue on family because I cannot remember the statistics right now. African Americans live a few years less than white people on average, and so on and so forth. So there's multiple dimensions to inequality. Slide one. This is a continuation of the slide on anti-blackness. Actually, this is the slide that comes first, and then the other slide comes after. Slide 9, I think it was. Um, Neighborhoods and communities are important. Low income and minority neighborhoods tend to have all sorts of issues, which might be relevant to you in social welfare services. They may not have grocery stores, they may be what's called a food desert. So people shop at 7-Eleven, or they shop at, or they eat from, fast food. There may not be banks in the community or the neighborhood. So people may rely on payday loan places, which are loan sharks that target people they know can't pay and that they charge exuberant interest rates like 50% interest. They may be farther from emergency services. Emergency response times may be longer. They may not have safe parks for kids to play. Things like that. And a whole host of other things. Kids that live closer to freeways and highways have higher rates of asthma because there's more cars and more local air pollution and so on and so forth. Now, I want to read some stuff from my. I'm not sure how much of this we went over last week. I want to read some stuff I was going over with my intergenerational experiences course. And again, this lecture should not be as long as last week. It may be a little bit longer. I'm kind of front loading the course a little bit, so maybe lectures towards the end will be a little bit shorter. Okay. Just looking at my notes here. Well, okay, so the infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates are higher for African Americans than they are for Black South Africans. And this is because of racism, which causes stress, which weakens the immune system, um, which causes cortisol to be released in the bloodstream, that hormone, the stress hormone, so called. And this is due to microaggressions. So, microaggressions. And this can cause premature aging as well and hurt maternal health, because maternal health is not just the 9 months prior to birth, it is the entire life of the woman. So that would be another example of health inequality and racism. The school to prison pipeline you may have heard of. So schools have student resource officers. School offenses have become criminalized. And so instead of like an in-house suspension, children may may go to juvenile hall. There are school districts, especially low-income, predominantly minority school districts, where more money is spent on security than teachers. So they're basically little prisons. Anyway, let's see. The majority of poor people in the United States and the majority of people on welfare are white, but people of color are overrepresented. So, for example, African Americans are about 10% of the US population, but African Americans are about 20% of people in poverty. So, yeah. 1 in 10 people in the United States is incarcerated. That's more than any other country in the world, both as total number and percent of our population. 1 in 3 black men will be incarcerated in their lifetimes. There are more black people incarcerated today than were ever enslaved in the United States during slavery. Um, um, Remember, this issue of criminalization is that it's about the person, not the crime. Okay? The majority of illegal drug users are white. The majority of people in prison for illegal drug use are people of color. The system catches who it wants to catch. It's not a crime to do drugs so much as it is a crime to be a person of color in our society. Okay. And that comes from critical criminology. I mentioned I'm teaching the juvenile justice course this term, so that's been on my mind. The takeaway from that course, a few people came to class the other day actually, was that in our culture, white children are framed as innocent and get diverted to therapy. Children of color are, in our culture, are framed as dangerous, and they may be tried as adults and be incarcerated. So the racialization, criminalization process applies to minors and children too, obviously, right? White people have and people in general have a hard time seeing children of color as someone who could be their own children or as children at all. That's part of the dehumanization process to stealing their humanity, stealing their innocence, right? Think about Trayvon Martin and what was that guy's name? Robert Zimmerman as an example of that. In Florida, the stand your ground case. A few other things. Asian Americans have the highest college graduation rates of any group, even higher than for white Americans. About 50% or half of all Asian Americans have a college degree or more. But um, they are not paid on average at levels that you would expect for people with a college degree or more, meaning they're trying to educate their way out of inequality, but it's it's like a treadmill just running in place. So yes, Asian Americans on average have a higher income than other groups, including whites. Yes, Asian Americans have a higher college graduation rate than other groups, including whites, but they are still not making as much headway and as much progress as they should be for that level of education. So that is one way Asian Americans, again, that is kind of a wrinkle in the whole thing. As it relates to Hispanic Americans and Black Americans, as we have been discussing today. Um, Women, too, I suspect, are trying to educate out of inequality, but of course, men's jobs with a college degree often pay more than women's jobs with a college degree, too. So there's just sort of no way out. It's quicksand. Let's see. Well, I mean, I already mentioned the way people of color are scapegoated because they're a weaker group, whereas rich white men who actually outsource jobs and are responsible for economic inequality are not. And that is about it. The one thing I'll say that is not mentioned here as well is this idea of gendered racial stereotypes or racialized gender stereotypes. So, for example, a black woman does not just have the experience of a black man and a white woman combined. There are stereotypes that go along with being a black woman. Um, Black women may be seen as less feminine than white women, for example. And uh, that is also the case for black men. Black men may be viewed as hyper masculine because of all the stereotypes from slavery about black sexuality and black violence, and so on and so forth. That is still used to scare people and threaten people. White politicians use it with white voters um, to convince them that, black men and women are stealing their welfare and are committing crimes, even though the majority of people on welfare and committing crimes are white. Okay, so and that applies to all groups. Hispanic women, Hispanic men. There are stereotypes that apply to them, and Asian American men and Asian American women too, and so on and so forth. Um, for example, Asian women are typically viewed as either, especially in cinema and in Hollywood films, as either like um, hyper feminine and submissive, or as a femme fatale, as a martial artist or a con artist. And Asian American men, again, in media representations, which then filter out into the culture and society, are often portrayed in the media, especially Hollywood films, as either nerds, computer scientists, or again as like martial artists or samurais or ninjas, which is just a weird thing and a tragic thing, right? Um, and so on and so forth. Um, so yeah, I guess I will leave it there for today.